Okay, I think we've got everything running here. Hopefully that's going to work out and everybody can hear me this evening. Welcome into the show. My name is Brian Schott. I am the managing editor and publisher of Utah Political Watch. Let me get my framing here. I'm an independent journalist who's been covering Utah politics for more than 25 years, and I'm glad to have you aboard tonight. And there's a lot going on in Utah politics. We are getting close to the start of yet another legislative session. The 2025 session begins on Tuesday of next week. And it'll be a 45-day to the sprint to the end. Actually, not 45 days, really. It's more of 30-some days because lawmakers don't work the full 45 days. It'll work on weekends. Anyway, glad to have you on board this evening. If there's anything you'd like to talk about, let me know. Leave it in the chat. Leave your questions, your comments in the chat. Say hello. And I enjoy doing this. If you don't know who I am, again, as I said, I am a independent journalist who's been covering Utah politics for more than 25 years, and you can read my work at utahpolitics.news. I've already seen some of the bills for the upcoming legislative session. Those have started to make the rounds. It looks like lawmakers again are thinking about cutting taxes, even though we're experiencing a shortfall in our income tax collections. They've already accounted for that. They're blaming the fact that the federal tax cuts are causing a dip in the income tax collections while conveniently ignoring the fact that they've cut income taxes by about $1 billion over 4 years. And if you don't know how Utah's budget is set up, that is money that goes into a fund, used to be known as the Education Fund, now it's known as the Income Tax Fund. And under Utah's Constitution, income tax money can only be used to fund public education, higher education, and some social services for disabled Utahns. So when they cut taxes, they are taking future revenue out of that fund. So when they say that they are down or income tax collections are down or they're lower than what they expected, that's because they've taken that future revenue out of that fund already to cut taxes. And those taxes mostly go to the top earners in the state. I think I've seen some analyses, and I've written stories on this, the fact that those income tax cuts benefit the top 5%, 10% of wage earners. 20% of the money for the income tax goes to the top 5% of income earners in the state. And again, that's money that could go to public schools or higher education or even some social services. So anyway, a lot to talk about tonight. They are talking about doing some income tax cuts again. I've seen a couple of bills that have come out, one from Senator Dan McKay, and I think the other one is from Abbott Nelson, Representative Abbott Nelson in the House. Some of the other legislation that we've seen, lawmakers want to have a porn tax to fund teen mental health services. Now everyone is saying, well, they already banned porn in the state. When they did the age verification law, Pornhub and other major adult content sites blocked people in the state of Utah. Well, so there's nothing to tax, or at least that's what people say. But that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about people who would buy a subscription to an adult site, they would get taxed 7%, or people who create in Utah. And there's probably some adult content creators who have accounts on OnlyFans in the state. It just stands to reason with so many people producing content. So any of those subscriptions for those creators would be subject to this tax as well. Those platforms would have to pay a $50,000 fee to the state, a registration fee, and attest that they are complying with the state's age verification laws, and if they don't do that, they could get fined up to $1,000 a day. So anyway, lots of stuff to talk about tonight. If you have anything you want to know about, anything that's on your mind, let me know in the chat. We are live on TikTok. We are live on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch this evening, and glad to have you on board. Over on TikTok, I don't have to look at my phone anymore. I figured out how to get the TikTok chat in the browser. Pretty damn excited about that. Elliot Nutter on TikTok says, how's it feel having Trevor Lee get mad at you on Twitter? What else is new? He's mad at me all the time. He's been mad at me since I was the one who exposed his anonymous Twitter account back in 2021. Or 2022, when he was first running for the legislature. He ran this really vile anonymous Twitter account where he posted anti-LGBTQ content, far-right content, election denial, COVID, misinformation, and it showed that he was also a member of the DesNat community. And if you don't know who the DesNat community is, that stands for Desert National, and that is a far-right offshoot of the LDS Church. So Trevor Lee's mad at me all the time because I'm onto him. It doesn't bother me. And there have been other stories where I've interacted with him where I ended up not writing the story. I remember specifically a very long back and forth I had with Trevor Lee when he swore up and down that Davis County schools were providing, that there were furries in Davis County schools, in the school where his daughter goes. There were furries in those schools. He swore up and down, and he also swore up and down that they were providing the litter boxes for kids to use in their rooms. None of that was true, but he just wouldn't listen. But we went back and forth about that a bunch. Every day with Trevor Lee is a new case study in Dunning-Kruger. It really is. Does not understand the limits of what he does not know. I'll just put it that way. But thank you for the question. DMAC4350 on TikTok says, can you talk about the Southern Utah County Commission that didn't adjust things for the new district maps? Yeah, that was a story. I was looking into it, but the Salt Lake Tribune reported it first. The Washington County Commission decided not to adopt the new maps for the new congressional map that was put in place by Judge Diana Gibson last year. It doesn't really matter. It creates an administrative roadblock, but they voted not to adopt the map. I don't know how much of an impact it's actually going to have because Washington County is going to be in. They're just not going to be in a district that has part of Salt Lake County in it. They'll be in this huge district that is the western side of the state and a big part of the southern part of the state. So they voted to reject it. It's more of political posturing than anything else. Doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Jeremy Mouse on Instagram says, furries, haha, sheesh, Trevor Lee. Oh yeah, he was sending me pictures of children he swore up and down were furries. They were Halloween costumes. It was pretty clear that they were Halloween costumes. But, oh, no, they were furries, and that's why he was launching some sort of jihad against the Davis School District. And I'm sure you're aware, he picked up a pretty significant opponent for the 2026 GOP primary. He's running against Bob Stevenson on the last day of filing, actually about an hour before filing ended. Bob Stevenson, who is a current Davis County commissioner. He decided to get into the race. He filed to run in House District 16, challenging Trevor Lee for the GOP nomination there. And Bob Stevenson is a legit candidate. And Trevor Lee, you have to remember, he had a pretty significant challenger. I'll make that a little smaller there so it's not in my face. But he had a significant challenger in 2024 for the GOP primary, Daniela Harding. He ended up winning by 509 votes. So he didn't win by much. And now he's got a candidate who has deep ties in that community. Bob Stevenson is a two-term Davis County commissioner. He was the mayor of Layton. He was on the Layton City Council. He taught at Layton High School for 30 years. So people in the community know him. And if Trevor Lee doesn't think that he's in some significant trouble, or at least he's in for a fight for this nomination, then he's underestimating things. So we'll see how that works out for him. But Lee is, I'm going to be interested to see how he conducts himself in this upcoming session, because he does have, as I said, a legit opponent in the GOP primary. Does he, now the smart thing to do would be to ramp down, back off, take your foot off the gas of the culture war stuff that he's been pushing. Try to moderate it. Because he can't win the nomination simply by appealing to convention delegates, which is what he did the first time around when he knocked off Steve Handy. When Steve Handy didn't understand that Steve Handy did not sign up to get signatures, and Trevor Lee defeated him at convention by getting probably like 30 some votes. I think he got 30 or 40 votes in the convention, and that was enough to give him the nomination. He can't do that at convention. He has to appeal to a larger group of voters. Now, it's still Republican voters, a pretty conservative bunch up there. But, you wonder if they're going to welcome the fact that there is a more, a less bombastic person who's running for that seat. And if Trevor Lee is not taking, if Representative Lee is not taking this seriously, that would be a huge mistake for him. So we talked a little bit about that. Speaking of the filing, let me pull up my story. I broke down the numbers from the filing day, the candidate filing. There's some pretty interesting numbers. There are 284 candidates who are running for the 15 Senate seats and the 75 House seats that are on the ballot right now. 145 Republican candidates, about 109 Democratic candidates. The Senate races, there are 93% of the Senate races have either one Republican or one Democratic candidate. In fact, out of the 15 Senate races on the ballot, there are 14 that have at least one Republican on the ballot, and there are also 14 with at least one Democratic on the ballot. Republicans, the only race that does not have a Republican is SD 14. That's held by Democrat Stephanie Pitcher, but she's got a couple. She has some challengers for that race. And in SD 20, Ronald Winterton, there's no Democrat on the ballot there. There are 3 House races that don't have a Republican candidate. HD 21, that's the open seat where Sandra Hollins is retiring. She's a Democrat. HD 34, Democrat Carol Spackman Moss is retiring after 26 years. And HD 40, that's currently held by Representative Andrew Stoddard, all a Democrat. There's no Republicans running in those seats. There are 8 House races without a Democratic candidate. HD 3, Republican Jason Thompson. HD 6, that's the open seat held by Matt Gwynn, who's going to step down right after the legislative session. His daughter was injured in a car accident, and so he's not going to be running for another term. HD 19, Republican Raymond Ward, I think he is actually unopposed, which will be a nice change for him after getting some pretty significant challengers over the last couple of cycles. HD 38, held by Republican Cheryl Acton. She's not running for another term. She did not file to run. There are Republicans running there, but no Democrats. HD 64, which is held by Republican Jefferson Burton. He's got at least 2 Republicans who are running against him at that seat. That race is going to be 100% decided at the GOP convention, because I think none of them are actually collecting signatures in that race. HD 65, Republican Doug Welton is the incumbent. I think he's unopposed. Haven't seen a candidate file for him. And HD 68, which is held by Republican Scott Chu. There are 3 candidates who are running unopposed right now, and all of them are Republicans: Ray Ward, Mark Strong, and Doug Welton. So 3 House Republicans are running unopposed. Kick Noons on Instagram. Good question here. Says, what is the likelihood, based on the latest reporting numbers, that the state GOP gathers enough signatures to place the gerrymandering bill back on the ballot for this fall? He's talking about the ballot initiative to overturn Prop 4 that the Republican Party is backing, and they're currently collecting signatures. I've been tracking this a little bit. I haven't put the latest numbers into my spreadsheet, but let me see if I can pull that up here. I know I've got it open. If you could see my screen, you would be appalled. There's probably 8 trillion tabs open right now. Some of them probably from the early Pleistocene era. Okay, so this is as of, I believe, Tuesday. So I don't have today's numbers in there. Maybe it's Monday. But as of Monday, they were 27% of the way to the total number of signatures they need statewide. They need 140,748 signatures statewide to qualify for the ballot. But at the same time, they also need to get signatures equal to 8% of the registered voters, or the active voters, 8% of the active voters in 26 of the state's 29 Senate districts. And as of Monday or Tuesday, they had met that signature goal in 3 of them: Senate District 25, 27, and 29. And they were at 99% of the total in Senate District 26. I'm sure they probably crossed that threshold. And they were at 87% of the number in Senate District 28. All of those in the southern part of the state. So I would guess that probably by now they're at least have 4. Again, I haven't put the latest numbers in. This was earlier this week. They probably are across 4 of the Senate districts they need, which means 22 to go. Close in another one. If you look, and actually they were actually at 95% of the total in Senate District 2, which is up north. So that's about 6 districts where they're either have crossed the finish line or about to cross the finish line, meaning they've got 20 more to go. And then if you count the number of districts, again, as of Monday, where they were above 50% of the signature total, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that would put them at 14 districts where they have either crossed the finish line or above 50%. And they would need to, get 12 more districts beyond that. And they've got until the 14th of February, Valentine's Day, to get there. That is 31 days away. So they've got 31 days to gather all of these signatures. And it was actually an interesting thing that I saw, because I know I put in the numbers for last Friday, and then I put them in on Monday. And one of the districts actually dropped by a signature. And the reason that happened is because people were taking their names off of the petition drive. That is something that they put in state law. There will be a certain amount of time where people can take their names off of this petition drive before it's certified for the ballot. That actually happened back in 2018. I've explained this before. There were 3 ballot initiatives that qualified for the ballot that year. A 4th, which was the Count My Vote ballot initiative. which would have gotten rid of the caucus and convention system to nominate candidates and moved us to a direct primary. That one did get enough signatures to qualify for the ballot, but then opponents launched a campaign to convince people to take their names off of the ballot or take their names off of those petitions. And they were successful. They got enough people in 2 Senate districts to take their names off the ballot that they fell below the threshold, and so they didn't qualify. So that's that. So that works. I did see, I think it was today, that Representative Karen Peterson filed a bill about taking your name off of those petitions, where you would have to, there's a lot of new conditions for people taking their names off of those petitions. It would change the way that people are paid to go out and get people to rescind their names. It's sort of and the part that really stood out to me was that there will be a provision that when people take their names off of the petition, they have to read a statement that says this could result in the ballot initiative not qualifying for the ballot. So that's a piece of legislation that she filed. It was made public, I think, today. Anyway, Kick Noon says that's a huge hill to climb. Yeah, they are behind the 8 ball. They're running out of time. And they've spent $4.3 million on the signature gathering effort, according to the latest disclosures, or the latest that we've seen, which is an immense amount of money. And if they do qualify for the ballot, and it's going to be a race to the end, but if they do qualify for the ballot, then there's going to be even more money trying to get people to vote for it. I have been breaking down some of the numbers. When they post the people who get the signatures online, and I'll have to bring this up, but I can give you some of the numbers here. But as part of posting the number of signature gatherers, or the number of signatures gathered online, part of that is they have to put a name, and there's also a voter ID number. And so, just to show that this person is a legit signatory. Well, I've been able to compare or match those voter ID numbers with Utah's voter file, which I have access to. Anybody can get access to the voter file. Now, I can't match all of the numbers because of the fact that some people keep their information private. Some of it is withheld and can't be released publicly. But as of the 11th, which was it was as of the 12th, which was Monday, there were a total of 38,000 signatures posted on the website, and I was able to match about 32,000 of them with the voter file. So who are the people that are signing this petition? Well, as you might expect, it is Republicans, primarily Republicans. Of the 32,000 people I was able to match their records in the voter file, 67% of those people are registered Republican voters, which makes sense. This is a Republican priority. Republicans are the ones who are mad about this independent redistricting commission. They're trying to repeal it, so it makes sense that they would be the ones who would be signing this. Democrats make up just about 8%, a little less than 8% of the total number of people who have signed these petitions that I was able to match. Now, there are about 6,000 out there that I wasn't able to match their data with the voter file. Unaffiliated voters, just above 19.5%. So the people who are signing these petitions are primarily Republicans, followed a little bit by independent voters, and then some Democrats. Um, on TikTok, a question: thoughts on the Washington County Board clip? Probably old news, but I just saw it here on TikTok. Yeah, this happened back in December. I talked about it a little bit earlier in the live. It's more of a protest thing. As I said, the Washington County Commission voted not to adopt the maps. It might put up a little bit of a roadblock down the line, but I most of it, it's just it's the Republican County Commission deciding that they're not going to follow this judge's orders. It's a political stance. It might hold things up. It could cause some problems again down the line, but we need to get through all of the other court stuff before we even get to that vote. And eventually, I'm sure that they will fall in line because they've got candidates down there who want to be able to run, and especially in southern Utah, Celeste Malloy, and if they refuse to adopt that map, then what is she going to do, right? Yes, the on TikTok it says more specifically the one where they push back against the judge's order. Yeah, they voted not to adopt the congressional map that the judge put in place last November. Again, it's more of a protest than anything real at this point. It might have a little bit of a it might have some impact again once we get through all the court stuff, but right now it doesn't really mean much. On YouTube, S Roundy 4118 says far right influencer Scott Presler is coming to Utah on Saturday for a signature gathering event. If you don't know who Scott Presler is, he goes by The Persistence online. Good for him. I remember he was planning on helping a bunch of Republican candidates during the 2024 cycle here in Utah. We never saw him. He can say all he wants. I don't know how much appeal he has. He doesn't have as much juice as he used to. He's young, so older Republicans think that's what younger Republicans would like, or what younger voters would like, and what would make them Republican. He's mostly just chasing clicks, which is the same thing Nick Shirley is doing. Nick Shirley is chasing clicks. But with Nick Shirley, we saw how much trouble these young people chasing clicks can cause, specifically in Minnesota. Elliot Nutter says, think Governor Cox will get any heat on transport since it went to the Supreme Court, or is that old news? Well, we know where he stands on that. He's not up for election again. So I doubt that there's really any political pressure that can be put on him. I mean, he already gets booed by his own party. And so I don't know how much it matters to him if he gets booed by people who don't like the targeting of the transgender minority. I don't know how much that bothers him. He's kind of all over the place right now. I mean, he got a big profile in Deseret News, and he's getting, we talked about this last time. People are talking about him running for president. He's not running again in Utah, so I don't really know what his political future holds. What is he trying to position himself for? I did break down his campaign finance report this week. Not that it really matters, but he did raise $1.6 million. Most of that from a handful of donors. He's got about $400,000 in the bank right now. I don't know what he can do with that money. He can't transfer it to a federal race. He decides to run for, people are like, he's going to run for U.S. Senate. He's going to run for president. He can't take the money he has in his account here in Utah, his state account, and transfer it. but he raised $1.611 million last year. That's the biggest cash haul he's taken in for an off-cycle year, and he wasn't on the ballot in 2025. That's the most he's raised in a year where he was not running for election, where he wasn't on the ballot since he took office. And there were 10 donors who contributed $50,000 each. That's $500,000. That's more than a third of the money that he raised, or just about a third of the money he raised. In fact, if you go a little bit deeper, if you look at people who donated to his, you have to call it a campaign, but it's not really a campaign, his political operation. The people who donated $20,000 or more, there were just 19 people, and that was nearly half of the money he raised in 2025. In fact, more than 2 out of every $3 he pulled in 2025 came from just 55 donors. So there's not grassroots support, at least from donors. People who gave $1,000 or more, about 200 donors, approximately 200 donors gave $1,000 or more, and they accounted for 99.9% of all the money he raised. I consider small dollar donations below $1,000. Below $1,000, he raised just $4,700, which is about 0.3% of the total. So he raised 99.7% came from people who gave $1,000 or more. 0.3% came from people who gave less than $1,000. So that's not grassroots at all. A lot of his donations came from corporate money, specifically construction and real estate interests. They kicked in about $300,000, which that's notable, given how much he's talking about solving the housing crisis. Some of those $50,000 donors are real estate interests. Clyde Companies, Price Real Estate Group, SETI LLC, Reef Capital Partners, Holly House Holdings, all of those scratch $50,000 checks to Cox, and they are real estate interests. And we're talking a lot about solving the housing crisis. He also took $25,000 from New York real estate developer Gary Barnett. His company is building a ski resort in Deer Valley, and they're getting state money to do it through MIDA, which is the Military Industrial Development Authority. And that group, they pay for infrastructure for projects that are supposed to benefit the military, but somehow a ski resort at Deer Valley fits that definition. So Cox raised a lot of money, but he also spent a lot of money. This is what was kind of startling for me, because he raised $1.6 million. He spent over $1.4 million, and most of it went to fundraising events. His Governor's Gala fundraiser, which is held in November at the Grand America, he dropped almost $500,000 on that. The venue was $170,000. Flowers were $45,000. Entertainment this year, a couple of comedians. Ryan Hamilton got $50,000 for the private show. Another comedian, Joe Zimmerman, got about $20,000. He hired the SLC Mass Choir, another $5,000. But that's a bargain compared to what he did in 2024. If you'll remember, he hired Brandon Flowers, the lead singer of The Killers, to do a private show for his gala. You probably have seen the video of Cox crowd surfing during that. That cost $100,000. So he got he was a little more cost effective this year. But he spent $500,000 on that. He spent almost $200,000 on his inauguration back in January, his second inauguration. Then he spent about $75,000 on his golf tournament fundraiser that he has. Now, usually what you do is you give this money to political candidates. Well, he only gave $30,000 to political candidates last year. Now, it was municipal candidates. It was municipal elections in 2025, but still $30,000 when you raise $1.6 million, it's not a lot. That's not a big chunk at all. One of the biggest recipients of his campaign cash was Election Hive. That is a political consulting firm. They run a lot of the campaigns in the state. They got over $350,000. Oh, and by the way, Election Hive is co-owned by Cox's cousin, John Cox. So he raised a lot of money. He spent a lot of money. He's got $400,000 in the bank, but I don't know what he's going to do with that. Over on Twitch, Nathan Detroit, one of our subscribers, says hello. Hey, Nathan. He says, just read that the University of Montana president is going to run for Senate in Montana as a McMullen-style independent with Tester's backing. How did the Utah Democrats like the McMullen play in retrospect? I think okay, so let's backtrack. If you'll remember, in 2022, Evan McMullen wanted to run against Senator Mike Lee for Senate. And the Democrats, it was a big fight at their convention, but they decided not to nominate anybody. Cale Weston wanted to run for that seat, and eventually they didn't nominate anyone, so they could clear the field for McMullen to run head-to-head against Lee and not split the vote. Now, McMullen lost. We all know that. And there are still a lot of hurt feelings on the Democratic side from that, but as I've said before, if you look at the results, it worked. It worked because it was the closest U.S. Senate race in Utah in decades. If there had been a Democrat in that race, McMullen and the Democrat would have split the votes and Lee would have won by 20-some points. He won by just over 10. If it had just been a Democrat in the race, Lee would have won by 30. So it was a gamble. It didn't ultimately pay off, but there was a moment in that race with about a month to go where it looked like McMullen was going to win. In fact, Lee's campaign was panicking. You remember when he went on Tucker Carlson and begged Mitt Romney to endorse him? Do you remember that really embarrassing moment from Senator Lee? That's why, because all of the internal numbers showed that he was in trouble. So it almost worked. I think it's interesting that they're going to try the same thing in Montana. And that's what you have to do in these Republican supermajority states where the Democratic brand is essentially toxic. Democrats do not win statewide races here in Utah. They just don't. And you can either tilt at windmills again and again and again, or you can try something different, which is what the Democratic Party did. And in retrospect, it worked better than what they had been doing in the past. Elliot Nutter on TikTok says, if somehow Cox replaced Mike Lee in the Senate, I'd consider that an extreme win. Doubt it, though. Again, I don't know if that's what Cox wants to do. I also don't know if Lee's going to run again. But we're not going to find that out until 2030. Like, we've got time. No, it's 2028, sorry. 2028. I can't do math tonight. We've got time. It's going to be a while. It's a long time between now and 2028. So we'll have to see how that works out. What else do I want to talk about? Oh, speaking of Trevor Lee, I don't know if you saw his bill that would rename Harvey Milk Boulevard in Salt Lake City after Charlie Kirk, the conservative podcaster. Now, a lot of people are upset because this is trolling. I mean, it's rage baiting the libs. But I think the bigger part of this story is, in order to do this, Lee is inventing a brand new state power. He's inventing a new authority for the state in order to do this. That's the only way that he can do this. Because cities have the power over naming their streets. And that's what Salt Lake City did in 2016. The Salt Lake City Council unanimously voted to name a portion of 900 South, about 20 blocks of 900 South, Harvey Milk Boulevard, after the slain civil rights leader. He was the first openly gay elected official, I think statewide elected official in California. And Lee first broached this after Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth ordered the Navy to rename a boat that was, named after Harvey Milk, who was a Navy veteran, by the way, but they renamed a ship that was named in his honor. And Lee said he wanted to do that in Salt Lake City. But in order to do that, he has to create a brand new process, a brand new power for the state to override the city's wishes. And if this bill passes, the city would be forced to change the name to Charlie Kirk Boulevard, and they would never be able to change it. They would never be able to do anything else. And people are getting upset. I mean, people are upset, and that's kind of, I guess, Representative Lee's goal here is to upset the libs. He wants to own the libs, right? Wants to drink liberal tears. But the bigger picture is you listen to the legislature preach local control. The people who are closest to an issue make the best decisions. You hear them talk about this time and time again. But as it's been said dozens, I've said this, and I've heard this hundreds of times probably. They believe in local control until the locals need controlling, and then the state is more than happy to step in. But they're creating a brand new power to allow this. And if they do this, then, what else is on the agenda? The legislature could decide to rename Martin Luther King Boulevard. They could do any of that stuff. And not for nothing, Trevor Lee, I mapped the route from his house to get to the current Harvey Milk Boulevard. He'd have to drive 30 miles, more than half an hour. That's not local control. And would it make more sense to name a road near Utah Valley University for Charlie Kirk? We'll have to see whether this bill makes it out of rules. We'll see if it gets. I mean, it might get out of rules. It might get a hearing. I don't know what the appetite is going to be. He's got other pieces of legislation that are far more interesting than this one. I just thought it was fascinating that the legislature that this gives the legislature a power that they did not have before. And they love to scream about unelected officials. And they love to scream about bureaucrats making decisions and people who don't have a power taking power that they don't, that they're not supposed to have, specifically the judge in the redistricting case. But in this case, they're just creating authority out of thin air that they did not have before. Anyway, welcome in tonight. Thank you for joining. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, I would love to hear about it. I'd love to leave it in the chat. Let me know what you are thinking this evening. I don't know if you saw this earlier today, but Senate Republicans blocked a War Powers Act vote, a War Powers resolution about Trump's action, about President Trump's actions in Venezuela. Senator Mike Lee voted with the Republican majority. Vice President J.D. Vance had to cast the tie-breaking vote. It was a procedural vote, but Republican Senators Rand Paul, Lisa Murkowski, and Susan Collins voted with the Democrats. It tied at 50, and then Vice President Vance broke the tie. And that's interesting because Senator Mike Lee loves to yell about war powers, that it is the exclusive power of Congress to declare war, which is what it says in the Constitution. But it's also not surprising given how fast he reversed himself when the attack first happened on Venezuela. When we first heard about the attack, he was on social media saying he looked forward to hear how this is legal. I'm paraphrasing aggressively here. But then within a couple of hours, the administration yanked his chain, and he said that it's okay to use the military for a police action in a foreign country. Really? Really? Show me. Show me where that is. Show me specifically in the Constitution where it says that. I would like you to read Article 1 and Article 2 of the Constitution out loud, Senator Lee, and show me. Because I can't seem to find that. So even strict constitutionalist Senator Lee is very malleable when it comes to what the administration wants to do. There was a bill that was filed today, bill filed earlier this week from Republican Representative Joseph Ellison. That's going to crack down on prop bets in Utah. Gambling's already illegal in Utah. It's outlawed under the Constitution. That is the reason why we cannot have a lottery in the state, and we never will have a lottery in the state, because it is in the Utah Constitution, and the only people who can propose a change to the Utah Constitution is the legislature, and they're not going to change the Constitution to allow the lottery. That's the reason why. But for some reason, these sports books like DraftKings and FanDuel and some of those other places, they are operating in Utah. Now, it's not the actual sports betting. You can't actually bet on an event. That's illegal. But there is betting going on online called Daily Fantasy Sports, where you play fantasy sports against other players, either like for a day or for a week. It's short-term fantasy sports. You put money in and you can win money from other players. And then they also have pick'ems, where you will bet your money against the house on, a player's stats. Will, for instance, LeBron James score more than 25.5 points in an upcoming game? That's allowed here in Utah, or it's going on here in Utah. And it's a legal gray area because it's not specifically sports wagering. But Representative Ellison's bill, HB 243, adds proposition bets to the definition of gambling here in Utah. So if this bill passes, that will be the end of daily fantasy sports in Utah, the end of these prop bets where you can bet, you can bet on statistics. Well, how many touchdowns will this person have? How many catches will they have? You can even bet on whether the pregame coin flip will be heads or tails. That's what those proposition bets are. If this bill passes, that will no longer be allowed. And I think people are right to be concerned about this online betting. It's exploded. If you remember back in 2018, the Supreme Court said that basically in their decision of Murphy v. NCAA, they said that states could legalize sports betting. And after that, it exploded mostly online. I pulled up some stats. In 2017, there were about $4.9 billion bet on sports. In 2023, that number jumped to $121 billion. And 94% of those wagers were online. So online sports betting is a huge business. The next year, 2024, nearly $150 billion was spent. Research shows about half of American men under the age of 50 say they have at least one online sportsbook account, and that includes these daily prop bets, these pick 'em bets, this daily fantasy. But at the same time, people are having problems with gambling, especially young people, college students. Among bettors the age 18 to 34, 90% said that they thought that they could make money from sports betting in 2025. That's up from 82% the year before. 1 in 10 college students meet the criteria for being a pathological gambler. The U.S. population, it's about 2 to 5%, so it's at least double what it is in the population, and maybe even 5 times. 75% of college students gambled in the last year, according to this research. A lot of times they use financial aid dollars to do it, and 6% reported losing more than $500 in a single day. I don't know if you, there was I forget who did it. Maybe it was 60 Minutes, where they did an investigation where they met with a guy who was very successful at these online sports betting. And he had been banned from all the apps because he was too successful. And he taught them what they needed to do, and they opened up some accounts, and they started betting, and they started to make money, and then all of a sudden they were banned too. They don't want people who win on these apps. They want people who are going to continue to make them, who are continuing to give them money. I used to work in sports radio a long time ago. When I first came to Salt Lake City, I was working at a sports radio station. And one of the hosts there said something that has stuck with me ever since. And this was long before we had online gambling. But they said, the people who run sports books, you don't see them driving Yugos. And for those people who are young, Yugo was a really crappy car at the time. They don't drive Yugos. They don't. The house always wins. So this will be interesting to see if it passes. I wonder what kind of lobbying those industries are going to use to try. I wonder what kind of lobbying those industries are going to use to try to push back against this proposal. Because there are 40 states that allow at least some kind of either daily fantasy sports or these pick 'em bets, and they don't want to lose Utah. Kathy on Instagram says, Blake Moore said in his newsletter that he's sure the Venezuelan people are better off now. He also thinks the administration needs to request authorized use of military force from Congress. Are they better off, though? Well, I mean, the only thing that's really changed is Nicolas Maduro is gone. The administration, his administration is still there. And you've had President Trump talking about more military strikes against Venezuela. So I don't know how much has changed, but I do agree with him that Trump needs to request authorization from Congress. I don't think they're going to do that. They haven't so far. I don't know if you saw the New York Times story yesterday, but the first time that they struck one of the alleged gunboats or drug boats in the Caribbean, they used a top secret U.S. plane that was disguised to be to look like a civilian plane. That is a war crime. You are not allowed to do that. That is a war crime called perfidy. That's your word of the day. That is illegal. You cannot do that. And that is probably why they went back for the double tap attack on that boat. Remember when everybody got, when we found out that there were some survivors and they went back and killed the survivors? It's probably because they were using a plane that was disguised to look like a civilian plane, and you're not allowed to do that. That is a war crime. Anyway, love to have you. I'm glad everybody's on board tonight. Thank you for joining. Let's see. JT Yo on YouTube says, Greenland, the 51st state. That, I don't understand it, but people who know a lot more about me than this, here's what's going to happen. Here's what will happen if the United States were to attack Greenland. And there have been reports that the Trump administration has ordered the Defense Department or the Department of War to come up with plans for invading Greenland. First thing that's going to happen. Are you a coffee drinker? I am. Well, your coffee is either going to get extremely expensive or disappear completely, because we don't grow it here in the United States. We get some out of Hawaii, but whatever's grown there the price is going to go through the roof, because that's international trade lines will be either completely disrupted or slowed down significantly. You'll see other countries slap sanctions on the U.S. That's neat. And then the biggest thing that it's going to do is it's going to send a message to countries that are in NATO that the only way they're going to be able to protect themselves from a belligerent United States is nuclear arms. And you've already seen European countries talking about creating a mutual defense nuclear weapons pact. That's terrifying. Nathan Detroit on Twitch says, I've heard the big issue is that Trump thinks Greenland is huge because he doesn't understand how the Mercator projection works. Yeah, Greenland on that map is a lot bigger. He also, isn't that the map that you also think that Alaska lives in a box near Hawaii? Nothing good can come out of the United States forcibly taking Greenland from an ally. I never thought that we'd be here, but you have to take these threats from President Trump at least seriously, because he was saber-rattling against Venezuela, and look what happened there. I think the next target is most likely going to be Iran. You don't have to be a genius in foreign policy, and I'm certainly not, to know that that's coming. Elliot Nutter says, do you follow sports, Brian? My Utah family has come to love hockey with the Mammoth. As I said, I used to work in sports radio. I worked in sports radio and news radio in Denver before I came out to Salt Lake City. I worked at the stadium with the Colorado Rockies baseball team for the first few years of their existence. I was the stadium producer, so I helped the on-air team there. I covered the Colorado Avalanche when they won their first Stanley Cup. Denver Broncos, all of that. I traveled to Chicago when the Utah Jazz went to the NBA Finals for games 3, 4, and 5 in 1998. So I did follow sports rather religiously. Now I don't follow it too much. The two that I do follow, I do follow soccer. I love English Premier League football. I am a Premier League degenerate. Not as much as my son, but I'm pretty much a degenerate when it comes to that sort of thing. And then I also follow college football, specifically my Oklahoma Sooners. But I like college football. I don't know what it's going to be with all this NIL stuff, but that's what I follow. Ryan Hi-Fi says, go Arsenal. Boy, you and my son would be fast friends. He is a huge Gunners fan. He moved down to Phoenix last year and found a bar where all the Phoenix area Arsenal fans go. And he has never gotten up that early in the morning, but sometimes they'll like open the bar at 4 o'clock in the morning to watch a game, to watch a match. So yeah, he's a big Arsenal fan. For Christmas, I got him an off-brand Lego uh, replica of their Highbury Stadium, not their current stadium. Um, and I was fortunate enough to take a trip to the UK a couple of years ago. My wife and I went there for 17 days to celebrate her getting through her cancer treatment. So we decided to celebrate that and went over to the UK for 17 days. And I was fortunate enough, I did get to attend a Premier League match. I went and saw Chelsea at Chelsea at their home stadium play Nottingham Forest. That was a lot of fun. I'm not a big Chelsea fan, but those were the tickets that I was able to get a hold of and go see. And that was a lot of fun. And then I did get on the subway and made my way over to the Emirates Stadium for Arsenal. Spent a good chunk of time in their gift shop, FaceTiming with my son, who was back in the United States, in case he wanted to see if he wanted any souvenirs from that. So that was fun. So my son is a big Arsenal fan. I'm excited about the World Cup, but I don't know if you've seen the news, but there's reportedly thousands of fans are canceling their tickets, not coming to the United States because of what's happening with ICE and immigration. And FIFA is reportedly having an emergency meeting this week to talk about it. I don't know what's going to happen. And I don't know if they'll take any steps, but at least they're discussing it. At least it's become enough of a problem that they're discussing it. Elliot Nutter says, ready for the Olympics next month, ready for the Republicans to get mad over the opening ceremony again. I don't know what the Italians are going to do that can top the French. I mean, if you got mad at the French opening ceremonies, well, you don't know the French, right? I mean, that's exactly what I expected them to do. I thought the opening ceremonies for the Paris Olympics were tremendous. I thought the scene where they had Gojira in front of that building with all of the Marie Antoinettes with their heads off singing, that was so freaking cool. That was one of the best things I've ever seen. And yeah, for a small amount of time, they'll look like a drag queen first supper. Who cares? I mean, really. But I guess if you want to be mad about something, you're going to be mad all the time. But I thought that those opening ceremonies were great. And I am a sucker for the Olympics. I am a sucker for it. When Bud Greenspan was doing his 16 Days of Glory movies, those were so great. And I was such a puddle at the end of them. And the first one I watched was about the 84 LA Olympics. And that was so good. And I was hooked at that point. So yeah, I'm excited about the Olympics. I'm ready for them to start, and I'll watch weird events. I'm gonna become, I love it because you become really invested in these events that you only become invested in once every 4 years. But biathlon, curling. And I have to warn my wife, this is probably about the time when I start saying, I should probably head out to the Utah Olympic Oval and learn how to curl, because that looks like fun. I'm not going to do that. But I talk about it every 4 years during the Winter Olympics. Elliot Nutter on TikTok says he has spreadsheets for the Olympics. You are a bigger fan than I am. I will genuflect in your direction about that. Kathy on Instagram says, Perucci, she's talking about Representative Candace Perucci, seems to be pretending to support working families by lowering property tax. Poor people don't own their homes. They rent. There are no tax advantages to renting. Well, they have to do, as I've said before, there's not a lot the legislature can do with property taxes. That is a local government issue. There's just not a lot that they can do. They talk about wanting to reduce the income tax burden And it is a problem. Income taxes are going up quite a bit and making things unaffordable. But Kathy's right. The overall housing market is unaffordable. Starter houses are $400,000. You can't afford that for your first home. But nobody wants to do anything to address that with low income housing. They don't want to do that because we have NIMBY. NIMBY is so strong. Nathan Detroit says they could take the property taxes away and bank the interest. Maybe. But again, a lot of this is just on the local level. And I've seen some legislation, lawmakers are talking about trying to cap how much property taxes can go up, which is something they can do. They're talking about some truth in taxation stuff, which is a good, I think that's a good move. But overall, again, this is something that happens on a local level. There's not a lot that they can do. My Liberated Life on TikTok says, I'm thinking about the inversion being here during the Olympics in 2034. I think it's cute that people think that we're gonna have snow in 2034. As I've said before, this weather is freaking me out. It is extraordinarily dry this winter, and it's not good. Those mountains are awfully bare. So I think the inversion might be the least of our problems in 2034 for the Olympics. My lawn is it's starting to sprout. It's weird. It shouldn't be doing that. Someone was up at the Capitol the other day, and they said someone at the Capitol the other day said that they were up there, and the cherry trees were starting to blossom in December. That's not normal, folks. And it's setting off alarm bells with me, but I don't think it's setting off alarm bells with enough people who are in position to do something about it. Anywho. One thing I did want to talk about, and I think this is going to be an interesting, I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but I thought it was fascinating that it even got filed. Republican lawmaker, Representative Nelson Abbott from Orem, has filed a bill to create a constitutional amendment to impose term limits on members of the legislature and statewide elected officials, governor, attorney general, auditor, treasurer, so forth. And that's interesting because Utah did have a term limits law. Way back in 1994, there was a ballot initiative led by Merrill Cook. And if you don't know who Merrill Cook was, he was sort of an anti-establishment, iconoclast. He was a Republican for a while. Anyway, he spent some time in Congress, finally got elected to Congress after years and years of running for it. He was pushing a ballot initiative that would have established a 12-year term limit for state lawmakers and officials, and it would have also imposed a term limit on members of Congress. And Republicans in the legislature and Republican officials were worried about having that issue on the ballot because Orrin Hatch was running for, I believe, his fourth term in Congress at the time, fourth term in the Senate. And they thought that voters would not vote for, or they thought voters would have problems with the contradiction of this ballot initiative that would impose term limits and then sending Orrin Hatch back to Congress for a fourth term in the U.S. Senate. They didn't want that to happen. So what they did was the legislature passed a bill imposing term limits on members of the legislature. Okay? They passed their own 12-year term limit that year for members of the legislature. So that would have been 3 terms in the Senate, 6 terms in the House, and you were done. That passed. They grandfathered themselves in, and it wasn't going to go into effect until 2007. So they passed this in 1994. It wasn't going to go in effect until 2007. In 2003, they repealed it. Oh, by the way, the ballot initiative for term limits, that did qualify for the ballot, but it was defeated by voters by a 2-to-1 margin because the legislature had already passed term limits. But then in 2003, lawmakers pull the bait and switch. And what they do is they repeal this term limits law that they passed in 1994. In fact, I remember when that happened because it was one of the first. It was one of the first times I ever interacted with Senator Kurt Bramble. And it also taught me that Bramble was the kind of person who did not, if you didn't know what you were talking about as a reporter, he was going to make your life hell. So that was I learned very quickly that if I was going to interact with Senator Bramble, I had to be on my game. So anytime I see his number pop up on my phone, I have to get in a certain frame of mind because I know it's going to be verbal jousting with him. But anyway, they repealed the term limits that they had passed back in 1994. So it was a bait and switch on voters, and there was not a lot of debate. It just quietly got repealed. So now comes Nelson Abbott, and he has got HJR 3. Now remember, only the legislature can propose constitutional amendments. And under HJR 3, if it were to pass, it would cap 8 years in the same office for members of the Utah House, members of the Utah Senate, and statewide officials like governor, lieutenant governor, and so forth. So someone could serve 8 years in the House and then 8 years in the Senate, and then they'd be done. Now, if a person is appointed to fill a midterm vacancy before winning a full term in either chamber, then that would not count toward the limit. And if this passes, the clock would not start until 2027. So anybody who's in office, and they would not be subject to the 8 years until after 2027. Governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, auditor, treasurer, they would also have an 8-year limit in office. But if you've already served more than one term as governor, you could not be then elected as lieutenant governor. So they've thought that through. Now, members of Congress would not be touched by these term limits, wouldn't apply to them. The clock would, if this is approved, so it would needs to get 2/3 in the House, 2/3 in the Senate, and then it would go on the ballot in 2026. So that's one of the things that they are that's one of the things they're talking about. Sorry, I just got a text message from a former lawmaker who was asking me about something I was talking about on the show, and I'll get back to them in a minute. Okay, well, I've been talking for, over an hour now. Almost an hour and 20 minutes. So this has been fun. It's always fun. I really enjoy this. Nathan Detroit on Twitch says, maybe the Salt Lake will have evaporated by 2034 and everybody will get arsenic poisoning. Maybe. I don't mean to laugh at that. That's terrifying, actually. Okay, so that's probably going to do it for this evening, unless you have a last comment or question. I want to thank you for joining. Thank you for indulging me. We're going to be doing these a lot starting next week because the legislature gets going on Tuesday, and then it's 45 days to the finish. We might do one. I don't know if I'll have the stamina to do one every night, but probably multiple times per week to talk about what's happening up on the Hill, because there's a lot, and I think it's important that you understand what is happening, and I see that as part of my job to help you understand what is happening up on the Hill. Anyway, thank you so much for joining. Do me a favor, go to my website, utahpolitics.news. You can subscribe for my newsletter. That is free. You can also become a paying subscriber. Little bit of news. We just passed 2,000 subscribers. When I started this little venture back in September of 2024, I didn't know if anybody was going to, I didn't know if there was any appetite for independent news. And it turns out there is, and I'm so grateful. We just passed 2,000 subscribers, and I feel that is very satisfying to me. And there's a lot more room. There's more room for everybody else. So please go to my website, utahpolitics.news. I'll keep you up to date what's happening at the legislature, the important stuff. Try to break it down for you in a way that you can understand. You can follow me on social media. Follow me on any of these apps where you are watching this right now. I hope you have a great evening. We'll be talking to you next week when the legislature gets underway, and we'll be doing this several times then. So until then, thank you so much for joining, and I appreciate you, and we will talk to you soon.